Hello ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, and welcome back to another set review. As you probably guessed, it's that time of year again, and we're about to embark on another big expansion in the world of Magic the Gathering. This time around, it's Aether Revolt, the second part of the Kaladesh block, and let's just put it this way, it's pretty darn exciting. While I did find Kaladesh to be a fairly amusing set with a lot of neat and interactive cards dealing with artifacts, tokens, and several other different mechanics, I felt like it was a little bit lacking in some departments. I also felt like the energy mechanic could have been a little bit better balanced. I felt like a lot of the cards just didn't really, speak unless they had a lot of energy to power them. For the most case, this has actually been true, although there have been a few surprises. The neat thing about Aether Revolt is it does continue a lot of these mechanics. And one of these mechanics I'm not too proud of is the vehicle mechanic. Don't get me wrong, this mechanic actually does see some play, in Standard at least, and it's actually a very neat idea. The thing is, you just need creatures to power it, but in this format, it's really not that hard to get creatures. However, this new vehicle here, the Heart of Kiran, does seem to push vehicles a bit further in, a more powerful direction. While you do need 3 power of creatures worth to, activate this vehicle, you can also do this by removing a loyalty counter from a planeswalker you control, which does give you a bit more flexibility. Considering we recently had a banned vehicle for Standard, this thing is actually pretty darn pushed. Although it doesn't need 1 power worth of creatures, it still can probably do an activation just from having a planeswalker nearby. Saheeli Rai to name one. Odds are, considering that even though this is a legendary artifact vehicle, I do believe that this will see some play in Standard at least. A 4/4 for 2 is really pushed, and it more than likely will see some play, in one shape or form or another. Since I'm not too big a fan of vehicles, I won't draw too much time on them. After all, I don't think too many vehicles will see too much play. However, there are a couple vehicles that I really kind of think will be able to be played in Standard. Peace Walker Colossus, for example, can make your vehicles without even having them. Of course, you can also always do that wacky thing where you have one vehicle power another vehicle, but frankly, just having white mana around will be good enough. Aether Sphere Harvester is another interesting candidate, and although it's not the most aggressive vehicle, it can be a means of gaining some energy. Due to the flavor of this card, however, I was kind of expecting it to have some sort of ability that would make more energy in addition to entering the battlefield, but frankly, I think this is the best we're going to get. After all, there are a lot of other cards in this set and in Kaladesh that do generate energy, so they will likely have a bit of a synergy with those decks. Plus, it's only 3 mana, and you've got a fairly sturdy body. I mean, that's one big butt on a vehicle. Moving on to some more traditional artifacts, we have the Planar Bridge. This thing is a very similar thing to a planar portal, except it actually puts the thing you search for onto the battlefield. This honestly will be a very popular artifact for just about any kitchen table game that relies on a lot of ramp. Not to say that it can't be competitive, of course. It will likely have a home in a lot of EDH decks, and I guess if you really want to push it, it could see a home in Tron to really get that Karn out if you don't actually draw it. Although it does take a lot of mana, and it is a lot slower, so don't necessarily count on that happening. Regardless, I think a lot of people have wanted a card like this for quite a while. It's sort of like a Quicksilver Amulet, except it just looks through your whole library rather than just your hand. Quite a big improvement over the classic card, so to speak. My personal favorite artifact is Paradox Engine, and geez, this thing is just nuts. Frankly, I can see a lot of situations where you can just completely ruin your mana base, or not ruin your mana base, but really advance your mana base just by playing non-creature spells. In EDH, it's really easy to loop spells that return things to the battlefield so you can cast again, and good grief, you could probably get an infinite mana combo out of this. Of course, it has several other features that aren't quite as degenerate, but damn, this thing is just nuts. And I don't know if it'll see any play in Standard, but it will likely be good for something. Going into more cards that use energy, we have Gonti's Aether Heart, which can give you an extra turn if you get enough energy. Too bad it's only 1 turn and isn't abusable for, multiple turns unless you have multiple copies of the card. But frankly, I feel like extra turns have kind of been nerfed a lot lately, just because, well, you pretty much have to exile any spell that gives you one these days, or have to meet some sort of ridiculous requirement that is damn near unachievable. But hey, you never know. I feel like this will see some play in some sort of energy deck, possibly for standard. I wouldn't really count this card out, considering energy decks are actually really, really popular in the format at the moment. Moving on to some nice, weenie artifact creatures, we have the legendary Thopter, the Hope of Girapur, and honestly, I have no idea why this thing has to be legendary. I know it seems like it has a very legendary name, but honestly, I don't really know what a 1/1 Thopter is going to save anything from Girapur, or protect Girapur, or whatever this thing, the flavor behind this card is, because I really don't really understand it. Honestly, I feel like it would have been a better card just to have, like, whenever it deals combat damage to opponent, that player can't cast non-creature spells during his or her next turn. That would have been a lot more stable, but we just get basically a wacky silence on a Thopter, and you have to deal damage with the Thopter in order to really get that going. I really don't think this will be enough for Constructed Magic, considering that it's only one more turn, so you're either going to have to play a lot more aggressively or have a lot more aggressive creatures in addition to this creature to really nerf a combo in a format like Modern or Legacy. And even so, a 1/1 Thopter really is not that exciting. Maybe if you could find a way to recycle this over and over, then maybe it could see some play, but I don't get the flavor of this whatsoever. Moving on to something that may actually see some play in Affinity, we have Walking Ballista. And although cards like Hangerback Walker really haven't seen too much play in Affinity and Modern, although they are actually really good if you have ever tried them, this thing is actually quite nice with something like Arcbound Ravager or something very similar. Granted, once your Ravager dies, you can just transfer all the counters over to it and then just shoot them all at your opponent if your opponent has something that's preventing you from attacking, or just a really big blocker that could jump all day long. Although that activate ability is pretty expensive, I feel like this could potentially see some play, although I think just gearing up a flying creature with a cranial plating may just get the job done faster. So it may be just an alternate route just in case your opponent has some way to play around your core strategy. So don't count it out. The Merchant's Dockhand may also have a bit of a home in Affinity decks for Modern, as it does have a nice ability that can actually dig you for something you actually need, which is something I find Affinity does kind of lack, especially in the late game when they're struggling to find additional answers to beat down their opponent, who took care of all of them already. However, the issue with this is it will still fall down to a Stony Silence, and so it may not be, well, that worth it anyway. Nonetheless, I feel like this is a nice kind of way to do a semi-tutor or kind of do an impulse for what you need, depending on the deck you're playing. So don't count it out of Constructed Magic. I think it does have a purpose, and I think it can see some play. Maybe not in Modern or Legacy, but it definitely can provide a lot of value, and it only costs 1 mana initially. Metallic Mimic seems like it's a more nerfed copy of Adaptive Automaton. Although it does have a nice tribal ability when creatures of a specific type enter the battlefield to pump them, it although is a little bit, well, weaker in a sense, as it triggers upon entering the battlefield and isn't permanent. Plus, tribal isn't really a thing in Standard. I mean, you could probably really push it, and maybe if you want to, you can play the Vampire or Werewolf tribe. But honestly, I feel like this is just a little bit too weak in some aspects. Don't get me wrong, I think it does have a use for something, but it's just nothing too fancy or out of the ordinary. In short, I'm sure it can be solid in decks that do revolve around tribal synergies. For all you who love value from your artifacts, Scrap Trawler seems like the artifact creature for you. Getting back extra artifacts when your artifacts die or become sacrificed just seems like a really, really good deal. And considering there are several abilities in the game that do allow you or do require you to sacrifice artifacts, this seems like a perfect card to go along with those cards. In short, you'll never have enough junk to sack. On to some great uncommon artifacts, we have a classic reprint, for once, in the form of Ornithopter. I mean, this has actually seen play in Affinity, although it has lost a bit of popularity over the years. My big complaint is why the heck did they make this one of the Masterpiece series? I mean, I know it's a classic card and all, but seriously, if you pull this as a Masterpiece series, I kind of feel really sorry for you, because there are just so many better things you could have pulled. Nonetheless, Ornithopter is a great card. If you haven't missed out or haven't gotten your copies, this is another opportunity to get them, even though I don't think they're that expensive. But still, it's Ornithopter. It's a classic, and I'm kind of happy to see it, even though it likely won't see too much play in Standard. Moving on to more Cascade, which seemed to have a little bit of an inkling feeling in the last set, we have the Treasure Keeper, which basically cascades upon leaving the battlefield, which is basically Cascade but backwards. Nonetheless, if you could recycle this thing over and over, you'll be getting a ton of value, and considering I know how a lot of artifact decks work, yeah, this can likely, well, get you a butt ton of value. So don't count it out, even though it is a 4-drop, and is only a 3/3, which is about average for 4-drops, or as most 4-drops go. Did you ever want 2 copies of your Gilded Lotus for your EDH deck? Well, Cogwork Assembler can, well, give you that wish. It can also give you several other nice artifacts that could potentially blow the game wide open for you if you had 2 of them. And frankly, yes, although 7 mana is a lot to get a copy of something, it's always there, and if you have the mana, you can do this multiple times. And my gosh, I feel like this will just be blown open in casual games. And I don't know so much about Constructed or Competitive Constructed or any of those formats like Legacy or Modern, but it's definitely something to watch out for. Up next, we have a couple cycles of common artifacts. First up, with the Implement cycle. This cycle is kind of similar to the puzzle knots from the last set, and also similar to other things like spell bombs and the like from other sets before this one. My big gripe about this is even though some of these things can be really nifty for some various decks, the blue one costs a lot more than the others. And I mean, I know drawing cards can be really good, but still, you could have made it a little more balanced. Frankly, despite this gripe, like I say, I feel like these may see some play in decks that could use them, or decks that could recycle other artifacts, or get value from them. It's just too bad that Eggs is no longer a deck in Modern, or these things, well, likely could make a big splash. The second cycle of common artifacts is the Automaton cycle, which is of 2 mana creatures that have an activated ability. Although we aren't getting a Stony Silence reprint, these abilities are actually quite good with a lot of the synergies within this set. My personal favorite is the white one, just because it triggers with an ability that we'll get to very soon. On top of that, there are several other great artifacts that work well with the energy mechanic. I'm actually a big fan of this mechanic, and I think it could have been better developed in the last set, but I'm really happy that it's continuing in this set, and I actually hope it continues outside the set, because I really do like the energy mechanic. I'm surprised we haven't thought of a mechanic like this earlier. Nonetheless, if you have lots of energy decks, there's a couple more great options, but the option that is best to you will likely be of your decision. Finally, although it isn't an artifact, I really do like this new land here that is very similar, or could actually, in my opinion, take the place of a land like Glimmervoid in Affinity decks in Modern. This artifact is the Spire of Industry, and frankly, it just acts kind of like a City of Brass in a sense. That's actually a little bit better because it can actually add colorless. The reason I think it's better than Glimmervoid is because Glimmervoid just goes away completely if you don't have an artifact, but the thing is, all this really does is just become a colorless land if you don't have an artifact. You don't lose them, you don't have to risk your artifacts being destroyed, or really getting hit back a few turns just because you don't have any artifacts. I really like this land, and if you play Affinity or plan to play on Affinity, I would highly recommend you get some immediately. Seriously though, I still feel really bad if you pull an Ornithopter as a Masterpiece series. I could think of so many better artifacts that could have been remade in this series, and I really don't know why Ornithopter was chosen for this role. Just, if you have ever pulled one of those as a Masterpiece series, I am so sorry for you. I feel your pain. I feel your pain.